What if traditional menu engineering is costing you thousands of dollars in potential profits? Today, discover why some unprofitable drinks might actually be your most valuable menu items when you factor in customer lifetime value and operational considerations, and learn the counterintuitive psychology why having some lower margin options actually increases sales of your highest profit items, and how to leverage this principle on your menu.
Hello and welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach. Before we get started, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Spot On, who provide a great modern POS solution for the bar and restaurant industry, and Starfish, who use AI to turn your books into actionable steps to increase profits.
So today I wanted to talk about menu engineering. And for those of you that have listened to the show for a while, one of the things I love is menu engineering. And as a matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, we did an episode. It was episode from June 16th, which is episode number 141, all about menu engineering. As I mentioned then, I've talked about it a lot in the past. Menu engineering is one of my favorite things to talk about and to do when it comes to figuring out how to set prices and what items you should have on your menu and what items you shouldn't. So I've talked about it a lot. But here's the thing. There's menu engineering in its basics that we've talked about, and then there's advanced menu engineering, where we actually take into account some other factors and look at things that menu engineering may not be showing us to make sure that we're making the right decisions based on that menu engineering data. So if you really think about this, if you've been in the bar business for any length of time, you've probably heard menu engineering, and you've heard how great it is, whether that's from me or from somebody else. It's the industry standard. Absolutely true. It's, again, something I love to talk about and that I think is very important and a very useful tool. But it's also simplistic. It also can cause you to make decisions that end up hurting you, not helping you, even though the math makes it look like they do. So the good news is today that we're going to be talking all about a more nuanced approach to menu engineering that looks at some of these complexities and point out that what you're doing for menu engineering may be great. I mean, definitely doing any menu engineering and just following it precisely is better than doing no menu engineering at all. But we're going to talk about some of the customer psychology and pieces that may change the way you want to look at your menu engineering. So think of today as essentially the advanced course on menu engineering. So the first thing I want to talk about today is why the traditional menu engineering matrix could be costing you money. And when we think about that traditional matrix, and again, we've talked about this quite a bit, you have four general categories that you're lumping everything into based on popularity and profit margin. Those are the only two variables we're looking at. So we have stars that have a high profit margin and high popularity. We have plow horses that have a low profit margin but high popularity. We have puzzles that have a low popularity but a high profit margin, and dogs that have a low popularity and a low profit margin. And when we oversimplify things, when we really just look at it like that, and I've mentioned some of this before, but it's really important to understand that we go, okay, so dogs are low profitability, low popularity. If it's not profitable or popular, it should all go. And so you just, general logic would say, throw all the dogs out the window. That's not necessarily true. First of all, I'm not a fan of throwing dogs out windows. I really like dogs. But when we're talking about dogs in this sense, in this bucket that we've categorized things into, we don't always just want to throw them all out. Because what we're doing when we look at a menu engineering matrix in just its four quadrants is we're ignoring a lot of operational complexity, whether that's prep time, ingredient waste, training requirements, or even the fact that some items are loss leaders. And we're going to get into all that here in a second and go over really the hidden value of unprofitable menu items. But for now, just realize that we're ignoring complexities. We're also not accounting for, in a standard menu engineering thought process, lifetime customer value. So some low margin items may be what's attracting some of your most loyal, highest spending customers. And if we get rid of those larger margin items and we lose that customer, who cares that we were giving them a low margin item? Maybe it's a low margin item that's not even popular, but these particular regulars or set of regulars liked it. This guest avatar, this individual customer profile, or ideal customer profile, I should say, did not enjoy what we were serving, or didn't enjoy that we took it off the menu, rather. And so it's really a question of, if I remove an item, what are the second order, third order, fourth order effects? What is that causing down the chain for my bar? Now, the other thing that we ignore when we look at normal menu engineering is that we're ignoring day part and seasonal variations. So it's very possible that you have a drink on your cocktail menu that Friday, Saturday night, it is absolutely a dog. It's not popular. You don't make great money on it. become happy hour because of the way your happy hour specials math is working and the difference between the people that come in on Friday and Saturday night and the people that come in Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon. That dog in one day part might be a star in another day part. Also, traditional menu engineering isn't really considering how items work together as a complete menu ecosystem. Now, that sounds like a lot of academic BS, and to an extent that is, to say fails to account for how items work together in a complete menu ecosystem. But really think about what I'm trying to say here, which is each item on your menu has some psychological impact on the perception of the guest when it comes to your overall menu. So some menu items are there just to sell other menu items at the end of the day. And a great example of this, if we're talking about how you might see this in the real world, let's say you had a wine menu and your wine menu didn't really sell and you weren't making much profit on it. So you say, you know what, I'm selling a couple $100 worth of wine a week. I sell thousands and thousands of dollars of beer and liquor. And sometimes the wine goes bad. It's just not worth it for me to carry wine. And you run the standard menu engineering matrix and you find all your wine is dogs. They're not popular. They don't have good margins. So you just say, okay, I'm going to throw out my whole wine program. Well, then when you throw out your wine program, turns out that, yeah, it wasn't popular. But all those guests that bought wine were also your highest spending guests when it came to your food menu because they like to drink wine with their dinner. Now you get rid of the wine, they're no longer coming in for dinner. How much money have you lost? Yeah, in theory, we got rid of an item that wasn't popular, that doesn't give us much margin. But by getting rid of that one item or set of items, we now have a situation where we're lowered our sales on a bunch of other profitable items. Obviously, that's not going to help your business. So when we start talking about ramifications, first, second, third, fourth order effects of changing menu items, this is the kind of stuff you need to think through. So again, a lot of what we're relying here on is the concept that in menu engineering, we look at unprofitable items and we get rid of them. But sometimes there's a hidden value to unprofitable menu items. So let's break that down a little bit. Let's start by looking at plow horses. So plow horses are those items when we do our menu engineering that have a low margin, but are popular. So we're seeing volume, but we're not seeing margin. Now, a lot of times those plow horses, because they're low margin, that probably means they're a really good deal. So those often can serve as critical traffic drivers. They help bring people in the door who then also purchase other items that are higher margin. So again, we're looking at that and we're going, oh, we could squeak out more margin here. But if you try to raise that price, if you try to move that just based on the fact that you said that item was a plow horse, so it's popular, but it has low margin, and so we want to increase the margin, maybe again, you're leaving out some people that will now not be regulars in the future, and they always purchased higher margin items, but they came in on the basis of that lower margin item. Then we can look at dogs again. I know we've been talking about dogs a lot, but some dogs serve essential strategic purposes. And when we say essential strategic purposes, a lot of times this is about how your brand is viewed and how the prices for other things on your menu are viewed. So if you've listened to some of the podcasts where I've talked about wine, one of them I talk about the philosophy I use when making wine lists. And for most bars, right, we're not doing complex wine lists, but this same methodology is true of your liquor list. And the methodology is this: if you have a bottle of wine that's the most expensive on your list, people probably aren't going to buy it. It's just a psychological reality. People do not want to buy the most expensive bottle of wine when they go out. So, for instance, when I worked at a country club, I would put a bottle of wine on the list that was $50-$60 more than everything else there. And I bought one bottle. I didn't buy a case. I bought one frickin' bottle. If two people decided to order it in the same week, I was going to have to tell them, one of them, no. But nobody ordered it because it wasn't there to be ordered. So it was definitely low volume, putting it in the dog category in that regard. And it was low margin because it was a bottle of wine that was really expensive. So I was giving people a great deal on it if you did decide to buy it. If you knew what it was, and in this case, if I remember correct, it was Camus Reserve was this bottle of wine. I was priced a good $50-$75 cheaper than the average market. So it makes it very easy for people to come in, see that bottle of wine and go, oh, hell, that's a great deal. I want to drink that. Perfect. I've put a bunch of money in my pocket because, again, contribution dollars, and we haven't talked about this yet today, but we have before, contribution dollars and contribution margin are not the same. Menu engineering, we're only looking at the margin. We're not looking at the dollars. So yeah, maybe I do have a 75% cost on that bottle of wine, but if the bottle of wine's $200 or $300, let's say 300 with a 75% cost, I'm selling it for $400. I made $100. It's not that difficult to see, okay, if I sell that, I'm making great money. Even though it's a low margin on a percentage basis, it's great money from a contribution dollars perspective. So you almost need some dogs in your overall ecosystem because you're going to use those to make other drinks seem cheaper. Say you had a premium bourbon program, and if your most expensive shot is $30, well, and $30 you've set the ceiling. If you put on a bottle of bourbon that, hey, this one's 75 bucks a shot. Now you've raised the perception of what expensive is for everyone coming in and looking at that list, which in turn will help you sell more of the $30 shots. Now, along with this, one of the things to think about is that loss leaders are not just for retail. And we've talked about loss leaders a lot. I really am a fan of them, especially with food in the bar industry. If you've listened to the podcast before, you've heard me talk about steak nights that I used to do, where I was selling steak at cost. Come in, you get a whole dinner at cost because I know you're going to buy drinks. And so that's bringing you in. My margin on that is $0 essentially. But that's bringing you in, making you spend money on things that aren't just the $0 steak. And in turn, I make more money because I have more volume, and I would do those on a Tuesday night. So that volume on the other drinks made up for the fact that that steak I was giving away. Now, there's also something to consider called the halo effect. And we kind of touched on this a second ago, but I want to hammer this one down a little bit. The halo effect is by having premium offerings, you improve the perception of your entire menu, even if those premium items rarely sell. So we talked about this in relation to, like, it makes something that's expensive seem less expensive if there's something more expensive than it. But this is also true of how people perceive your establishment in general. You know, if you have a dive bar, but you don't want to be too divey, bring in some premium liquors. Why? Because the second those premium liquors are there, those of your customers that would drink that in another place think more highly of you because you have something that they can only see at the fancier bars. So that halo effect, that improved perception of your entire establishment and menu can happen when you have some premium offers that are very specifically selected, even if you never sell them. Another key part here, and this is playing right into what I discussed with the halo effect, is different customer segments have different purchasing patterns. You have to understand, especially if you're a neighborhood bar, you're going to be serving everyone, literally everyone. You will have guests that are unemployed. You will have guests that are multimillionaires. You will have people that are retired. You'll have people that are in college. You'll have everyone in between. And so because you get everyone, you're going to see all these customer segments in a neighborhood bar. And what's unprofitable for one segment, what they don't like, what's unpopular, might be highly profitable with another segment. It might increase their visit frequency. It might change the dynamics of your business. And I think one thing that I need to define here as we're talking about profit in this is accounting profit and economic profit. And accounting profit is like, hey, here's, it cost me $10. I sold it for 20. I made $10. That's my accounting profit. Economic profit is the idea that some items on your menu are going to create value that doesn't show up directly in your margin calculations. It's this undefined nebulous thing that we're really talking about here is economic profit, because we're creating a situation where as a bar, we're going to make more money in the long run. And that's very key. So let's talk about what you could do to have a slightly more sophisticated approach to menu engineering. If you don't know the basics, go back and listen to that episode. Like I said, I think it was 141, where we discussed that a couple weeks ago. But how do we actually take all this craziness that I've just thrown at you and all these different variables that I haven't really defined and turn that into a more sophisticated approach to menu engineering? Well, the first thing we could do is segment our analysis by day part, right? What's our menu engineering look at like on happy hour on Wednesday versus 2 a.m. on Friday? We have different customers, especially in the neighborhood bar segment. You're going to have ridiculously different customers across those two time periods. So we have to look at how are they different? How is their spending different? How does that affect my P mix differently? Rather than just looking at an aggregate, that's going to help you understand how those different client profiles impact your menu and what needs to be on it. You can also calculate the true operational complexity cost for each menu item. So we're talking about prep time, training requirements, ingredient waste, execution consistency, the amount of labor it's required to make something. Now, there is a guy, and I cannot remember off the top of my head who it is, created a menu engineering matrix that also lays in labor. Great. So there is a model out there that you can look at from an academic. I just do normal menu engineering and then stare at it and think. And that's much more my speed than doing additional math, because as much as I like finance and math, I really don't like math. And so I don't go through all that time to calculate out those true costs, but it is doable. And if you Google it, you can find menu engineering with labor included. It's a 8 matrix system instead of a 4 matrix system. Or 4 pieces of a matrix versus 8 pieces of a matrix, however you would phrase that if you were an academic. The next thing I would look at is implementing seasonal menu engineering. So I've talked about this a lot. Menus that are static are boring. Boring menus decrease your food sales, period, end of story. Same can be said for cocktail menu. If you have a cocktail menu and your regulars have tried every cocktail on the menu, it's time to change it so they can try something new. So if you do menu engineering seasonally, that gives you a much better understanding of what's going on. And over a period of a year or two, you'll start to begin to understand how to strategically rotate items based upon customer preferences in relation to seasons, how your operational capacities change across seasons, and even look at how you're changing costs because you're doing this every quarter, how your cost structure changing is impacting the profitability of those items over time. We've talked about this before, but always on your menu, you should implement some amount of the decoy effect. The decoy effect is to strategically place items on your menu to make your high profit targets more attractive. And again, a great decoy can be something more expensive to make something less expensive seem not expensive, even if it is intrinsically expensive. Consider your full customer journey, right? We want to look at some items on our menu as entry points. Now, I would hate to relate the bar business to selling drugs, but bear with me for a second. Marijuana is seen as a gateway drug. We can have a whole philosophical argument on whether or not you believe that, but just let's take that at face value for a second. Marijuana is a gateway drug. So the old drug dealer concept being sell you some weed, you really like the weed, and then go, hey, you want something even better than that? Try this LSD. Well, just like a drug dealer in that scenario, and again, I'm not saying sell drugs. That's a bad idea for your life. But just like that drug dealer is using marijuana as the introductory product to eventually get someone to LSD, you can have entry point items on your menu. And a lot of times those are specials. Those are your lost leaders that you're basically giving away because that's the entry point. That's what brings them in the door. And then you can upsell them on other things once they're there. One thing also to consider is that you want to balance your menu portfolio. You want to diversify. Just like if we were talking investments, you want to balance and diversify your investments across your portfolio. You also want to balance and diversify your menu. So when I say balance and diversify, I mean diversity across menu levels, operational complexity, and customer segments, especially in the neighborhood bar market, where your segments are literally everyone that lives within a few miles. Having differentiated operational complexity, understanding your customer segments, and then diversifying across profit levels or even popularity levels are really going to help you understand how to better suit your menu and laser focus that into your specific client. And as a last note, design for bartender efficiency, and this is really just about factoring in labor again, but I find it so often when I sit at a bar, doesn't matter where I am in the world, I'll watch the bartender and I'll be like, hey, this could be set up a lot more efficient. They're wasting money as a business by having their bartender run around all over the place. So a slightly lower margin drink that can be made faster is more profitable than a complex craft cocktail during peak periods, especially. Right? When you're jamming, when your bar is running on all cylinders, the thing that hurts you the most is a complex cocktail that's going to take a minute or two to make. During the same period, you could have made 10 or 15 shots. So understand bartender efficiency as it relates to your margin. And again, you can Google, and there is a menu engineering equation and a whole system that brings labor into the equation. Again, that's not something I like to do. I just think that's too much work. So I do the normal menu engineering, and then I just look at things because intrinsically as an owner, if you're working with your bar day in and day out, you should basically know how hard it is to make something, how long it takes people. If you don't, freaking get a stopwatch, stand at your server well or your bar well, and just measure the time it takes to make every drink until you understand the time it takes to make a drink and the effort it takes to make a drink. So today we've explored why traditional menu engineering is a bit too simplistic and how seemingly unprofitable menu items can actually be a key part of your overall business success. Now, when we take a more sophisticated approach to menu design and we consider operational complexity, strategic positioning, and customer psychology, we have to remember that our menu is really not a list of items that exist individually, but it is an ecosystem where those items work together and they benefit each other, and that the balance between those items and how they relate is sometimes opaque. And menu engineering, yes, best tool I know. It's something you should do every single quarter. But menu engineering in and of itself is not going to show you those complex relationships that exist between the items on your menu. So never just allow something to be labeled as unpopular and unprofitable, but dig in and try to really look at the psychology of what you're doing, look at your individual customer or ideal customer profiles, and really build out how this is going to affect me before you make any big decisions on your menu. All that being said, I want to end on this note. Don't be afraid to change your menu. Don't be afraid to throw something off because it's not profitable. Right? At some point, you have to make a decision, and a lot of what I've talked about today is fear. So don't get caught in the fear. Make the decision, measure it, but the more you make decisions, the more you understand, the more those second, third, fourth, fifth order effects of a menu change will become apparent to you, and they all live in your data. So every time you look at your menu, make sure you consider everything and all of the impacts.
That about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you are ready to take your bar to the next level, schedule a strategy session with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Until next time, have a great day, and we will talk again later.